Hello everyone, today we are going to be learning different watercolor techniques. This sample is a little small, so we will do a larger one on our regular sheet of watercolor paper. This is a 9 by 12 inch watercolor paper. To divide it, we are going to use a ruler. If you don't have one, it's not that big of a deal. We'll just kind of guesstimate, and having some sort of straight edge will help make those divisions nice. Get a pencil and eraser to help with that. For the watercolor itself, you're gonna grab your tray, you're going to grab water, a paper towel. Multiple paper towels today is probably a good idea. For brushes, you're going to be able to use like 2 different brushes, so one of the rounds, 4 or 6, and then I'm gonna attempt to use the flat today as well. So you'll see that it says stroke at the end there, and that's just a flat kind of brush. There are some special things that we're going to need today, so we are going to be using masking tape as well as salt, which is pretty fun. And if you need like alternatives, then you can let me know if you don't have those things available to you. But some sort of tape that's easy to lift off, and then literal salt from your like kitchen, and you get this kind of really cool technique that you see here. So I'm gonna give us a little bit of time to gather all of those items. And here's like my salt. I like the bigger salt if you have different options, so like coarse salt or sea salt. The little table salt works also, but like the bigger it is, the more interesting usually. So we're gonna start by taking our ruler, and we're going to divide this paper up in half and into quarters. So this is 12 inches. So I'm going to do about 6 inches, and then at 3 and 9. And down at the bottom, same thing. So 3, 6, 9. And to divide our paper in half, this is 9 inches, so that's 4 and a half right between the 4 and the 5. Make sure you're lining up with that 0 at the end there. And then you connect the dots. So let's go the one going all the way across, just line that up. It's gonna be fairly light, you don't need to be really dark about it. And it's totally fine if these aren't perfect, so we're just trying to divide our paper up. We're not doing much aside from practicing different techniques today. And there you go. Afterwards, we're going to do some labeling. So on here, we're going to follow this set right here. So our first one is called splattering. So splattering. Then we're going to use masking tape. After that, we're going to do what's called lifting. You can also practice what's called blotting. And we get to do our salt, and that's going to be in a wet kind of pile. So there are our first 4. Now at the bottom, we have a gradient. Hopefully you remember what a gradient is. It's going to go from dark to light or light to dark. Then we're going to blend 2 colors. We're gonna do a technique called wet and wet, and that's when the paper is already wet and we try to add some stuff to it. And then we're going to do some drops in wet. This is just drop, but drops in wet is fine. Okay. So let's activate our paints today. You can use any colors you want to. So if you have the same set as me, that's fine. If you have a different set, that's also fine. I'm gonna grab a different one just for fun. If your tray is kind of gross, then we can do some mixing if you want to, but you don't necessarily have to. Just the tray should always be at least fairly clean. So I'm gonna take that, clean that out, really get into the corners. Like I said, there might be some staining that you see occurring, and that's fine. So clean that out, wipe so that doesn't get in my water, and we're gonna activate all of these with some water. So take whichever brush, doesn't really matter. Drop into your paint. You can use whatever colors you want to today. So I just got each one of them ready. So if I want to use a color, I can, but if I don't want to, then it's fine. So either way works. I'll move my water over here. Okay. So my first technique is kind of messy and it's called splattering, but it's a pretty fun one to do and you end up with these kind of smatters right here. So for this, it's kind of scary if you use red, but you can use, like I said, whatever color you want to. It does get a little bit messy. There's a couple of different ways that we can do this, but because it gets messy, you want to take your paper towel and just kind of make sure that the surrounding area is clean. So I take my paper towel and I kind of just block off the rest of them, and I'm only going to focus on that corner. Now in order to do splattering, there's a couple of different techniques that you can use. So I'm going to get my paintbrush full of some color, make sure that it's really, really like saturated and really wet. So just lots of that. If you want to use the top to mix a color, you can, but again, it doesn't really matter. Now for this technique, there are different ways to create different splattering effects. So the first one, which I think is the easiest, is if you just take your brush literally and you kind of flick with your finger. So you kind of pull back and then you flick down with your finger and you might get some really light splatters like that. It does get your finger messy though, so you have to wipe that off. Another way, and let me switch to a different color. Another way to do this is if you like just kind of whiplash your hand. So I'm going to take this and I can like just pull up really quick so I don't hit the paper, but I get really close and then I pull away. So that's kind of a quick technique. And then the last way, which is easy but again kind of messy, I'll grab another color again, is to use either your finger or another paintbrush, and you're going to tap at it. So if I tap at it, you see that a lot's getting kind of all over the place, but that does work. So use any of those three. So you can flick it, you can use your hand and whiplash that, or you can use another thing and kind of tap at it, and you should get some nice effects like that. You will get probably some paint on other surfaces, so once you're done with that technique, you'll take your paper towel and just kind of wipe those off before they dry. Thankfully, watercolor doesn't really do much, but you want to get that kind of early on so we aren't messing up the back of our paper. So do whatever one of those techniques you like, or try all three of them until you have a good amount of splatter. Our next technique is to do masking tape, and literally for this I'm going to put masking tape down, paint over it, and then wait for it to dry. So I'm going to take my masking tape. You can do it in whatever pattern you want to. Now, if you don't have masking tape at home, we can do an alternate technique. So instead of masking, you can do what's called scoring. And that's when you take like keys or something kind of sharp, like scissors, and you kind of score your paper, like you score meat. And you can kind of scratch at it. So if you want to try that, then you can do that if you really don't have masking tape. So you'll erase this and say scoring. It'll look pretty different from this, but that's just another technique you can do. So again, grab my brush, and I don't really care what I'm painting on there. I'm going to use whatever colors I want to, paint over it, and I'll just let that dry. So I use a good amount of water. Notice that it's not dry and not really scratchy, so that's pretty important to me when I'm using my watercolors. You can use multiple colors on one paper, whatever makes you happy. Okay. So masking tape, we'll wait for this to dry. If you were doing the scoring technique, then what I would have you do is like scratch your paper up and then go for painting on top of it. So let me do that with a sample that I have here. So your alternate technique, or if you really like are interested in doing a different technique, is to take something like scissors, a dry pen, keys work really well, and then you're just gonna score it. So here's me drawing in some lines, go that way. And this is only if you don't have masking tape, unless you really want to try it. And then you paint on top of it and see what happens. Just kind of have a scratchy paper is what happens, but that is your scoring technique. So this is scoring instead of masking tape if you don't have any. Okay, then we have what's called lifting and blotting. For this one, we want to paint first, and then we'll do a lift or we'll do a blot. And so some people like to take the watercolor directly and paint down into it. Today I'll do like a mix up at the top first for no particular reason, but I want some unique kind of colors. So get this pink and put down some blue. And again, I really want to make sure that this is wet and really saturated with a lot of color. And then I'm going to do a lift or a blot. And so in order to lift something out, I'm saying I'm going to lift out some paint. So I'm going to really dry my brush off. And I'm kind of using my brush like a sponge now. So I'm going to take it, I'm going to roll it, and hopefully you see it's getting a little bit lighter. I don't have to roll it, I can just kind of do some strokes like that. And you see that I've lightened it up a lot. So that's using my paper towel and my brush to kind of soak that. So that's the lifting technique, is I take my brush and I kind of lift off some of the paint that was there. The blotting technique is I take like a paper towel and then you kind of just dab at it like this. So same kind of deal, you'll probably get some interesting shapes depending on how you fold your paper towel. So there's lifting and there's blotting. There you go, easy. My next technique is called salt in wet. I'm going to skip that one and save it for the end. I like to do it and let my salt kind of dry out, but for right now it's a little bit difficult because I'm going to have to lift my paper probably for the next two. So I'll just leave that in that corner there. I put it in the corner because the salt I don't want to get on everything, so I want it in the corner. Instead, I'm going to skip down to my gradient. So it's going to go from dark to light. There are multiple ways that people have decided to do this. I like to use the flat brush for this. If you're working a lot smaller, then you can still use a small brush, but I tend to like to work bigger. So I'm going to take my flat brush, get some paint on it. So up at the top I have some paint. And this one's kind of hard to do. So you start by doing kind of a flat paint like that. And then at this point you need to wipe off your brush a little, get some water on it. So here's me getting some water. I'll kind of get rid of the excess. So I got some water, kind of wiped it off, and then before it dries I go back and forth this way. And I'll just keep doing that. So I'll dip it in water, wipe off the excess, and I'm gonna tilt down my paper so that it's easier for me to see. So again, that was me. I took some paint right here, got some water and wiped it off, and then at the edge, I'm kind of pushing it downwards, holding my paper to let the gravity help me as well. So it should go from dark to light. I'm going to do that a couple of times because it's hard. And it is possible to do it with both of the brushes, so you don't have to use the big one, but I think the big one's like a little bit faster and a little bit easier. So I'm just going to take some paint, make sure that it's not super dry. Water, wipe off. Water, wipe off. And I like to go like kind of back and forth. Water, wipe off. Water, wipe off. And if there's places where it's getting stuck, then you can attempt to help it a little bit and try by going over it again. So over there it got a little streaky. There we go. If yours isn't going super well, it's nice to like practice it first. As I said, you can also do it with your regular brush. It's just going to take a couple more strokes across the paper, but it's totally possible. You start up at the top. Oops, let's do way more paint. At the top, water wipe, get like the edge that you see there, and you see it's dripping downwards. Edge. So now you have kind of a gradient, so dark to light. And as we go along, it'll probably get easier for us to do. So obviously this requires some pretty clean water. So there's my gradient. Again, if it doesn't look good the first time that you do it, you can just wait for it to dry and try again. Just use the same color. So there we go. Clean off. Clean off. And there. Now, if you hated that, you're gonna hate the next one, which is blending two colors, because it's essentially making two different gradients opposite of each other. So yay, that'll be very exciting for both of us. So once again, I'm gonna grab a color. You can use either brush for this, but again, I like to use the flat. Start with red, dip and get rid of. Dip and wipe. And I'm gonna try to stop about halfway to go back and forth a little. And then I'm gonna put another color down at the bottom, kind of going up. So if you need to, you can kind of flip that around. Start up at the top, and then do that same thing. So wipe off. There. And this is something that really works well when you have two wet colors. So if one gets dry and the other one isn't dry yet, it doesn't quite work. So again, took my color, kind of slowly wiped down, back and forth, and hopefully they'll blend a little nice in the middle there. You can also wait for it to dry if you want to, and it'll be kind of a different look. So there you go. You're blending two colors. So if you wait for your color to dry, like let's say I have that gradient that I made at the top over there, I can take my color and as it's dry, make the other gradient going down, and we'll still have a similar look. So if that looks easier for you, then great. Whatever works. I'm gonna do another one here. Take, wipe, bring down. Flip that around right at the edge, and then wipe and bring down. There we go. The next technique is called wet in wet. For this one, you can use clear water. If your water is kind of gross, it doesn't super matter right now. But take whichever brush, and I'm literally just painting water down. And before that dries, I'm going to take my thinner brush at this point, and I'm going to draw something in there. So let me take, I don't know, purple again. And again, while this is wet, I'm going to draw something. So see how that like spreads out and it's very fuzzy. So if watercolor has water to attach to, it'll kind of blur. Otherwise we have like very sharp lines versus very blurry lines. I'm going to do something kind of similar in the drops in wet, but this time I'm going to use a color. I'm going to go in here, I'll use this black. And then I'm going to do some dropping in there. So you can literally take the water and drop it in. You might get something cool. So here's me. I'll kind of do the splattering techniques that I did, so I can just kind of drop water in there and you can see those. You can also take a color and do that. So since I'm working really dark, if I grab something really light and drop it in there, hopefully you still see some cool stuff. I can also literally just like poke at it as long as my paintbrush is pretty wet and you get these kind of cool blooms. Now our last technique is going to be our salt in our wet. Got it a little messy there, but it doesn't matter. So for this, I'll take a color. I don't know why I'm so into the purples today. Take a couple of colors, doesn't matter. I'm gonna swirl those together. And I feel like everyone should have salt at home, so once you have that, I'm gonna grab some salt while it is still wet. Dump it in your hand first. Don't need too much, but that should be okay. Could do more. And then holding it down, you wanna spread your salt on there, and we really need to wait for that to dry. But what the salt is doing is it's absorbing some of the paint. If you feel like you need more or you want to experiment with more, then go for it. And try to help that along a little bit. So if your paper is curling, then help it. Once this is dry, I'm going to peel it off. Same with this. If that's dry, you can peel off the masking tape if you got to do that technique. And then that should be it, and you're done kind of experimenting with different watercolor techniques for today.